I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I'm very honored and very humbled to be here today. They say that victory has 1,000 parents, and indeed, what today represents is the combination of talent and commitment by so many different people that no single person can take credit for it. The most important thing to recognize out of this is that it was a we that did this. It was people that believed in this building for a long period of time that kept fighting for it. It was people here in North Castle and White Plains that believed in it, people with a historical understanding of the value of this building. And it involved people whose talent was in construction and architecture. It involved people who could move the levers of county and state finance to make this happen. And this really is as community-oriented a victory as there could possibly be today. There are 1,000 fathers and mothers to this, and I want to read some of them off. First, let me introduce, and please recognize yourself when your name is called. Relatives of Ann and Elijah Miller are with us today. Carol Clark, Ann Novak, and Mary Ann Miller. We have with us here friends of the Miller House, Washington headquarters, Linda Fernberg, Susan Ross, Rosalie Weiskopf, and Herb Weiskopf, John Diaconis, Kate Hole, Nora Conze Manueli, Janet Loberman Beechert, and Ann Danzig. The leaders of the Daughters of Liberty's Legacy, Cynthia Abbott Kaufman, Deborah Palazzo. We have trustees of the North Castle Historical Society, Anna Maria Marone, Linda and Rick Cantator, Tom Rice, Sharon Tombach. We have here an illegal meeting of the North Castle Town Board. Barbara DeCito, Barry Ryder, Jose Berra, Steve D'Angelo, and you'll hear from him in a second, Supervisor Mike Shalero. We have with us my friend, the outstanding mayor of the city of White Plains, Tom Roach. The mayor supervisor of the town village, got to include all of this, of Harrison, Ron Belmont. The mayor of the village of Elmsford, Bobby Williams. We have with us our wonderful state senator, Shelley Mayer. And we have with us our assemblyman who put that last bit of money in that made this happen, Assemblyman David Buckwald. We have members of the Westchester County Board of Legislators. You're going to hear from some of them in a second, but the chairman of that board, Ben Boykin. The local legislator for this district who never lost faith, Margaret Cunzio. The head of infrastructure, and she has a PhD in history, I think, Mary Jane Shimsky. And probably the most historically oriented member of the board. He's a minority leader. I love him anyway. He's kind of a Lincoln guy, not a Washington guy. John Testa. We have the head of our Parks Board, Henry Neal, is with us. You're going to hear in a second the leaders of our Parks Recreation Conservation Department. First Deputy Commissioner Peter Tartaglia. And Commissioner Kathy O'Connor. Our senior management team is here. Our Director of Operations, Joan McDonald. Our Deputy County Executive, I just want you to know, Suffolk has 2 Deputy County Executives. Nassau has 5 Deputy County Executives. We only need 1, Ken Jenkins. And we have many other members of our executive team. I should point out, one of them is an elected official, Ellen Hendricks, who's a town councilwoman from Greenburgh. And Connie Kehoe's deputy mayor of the village of Irvington, involved with Revolutionary Troop 50. Somebody's going to jab me in a second if I'm misintroducing anybody. There are people involved in the construction and development of this facility, and we're going to ask in due time Kathy O'Connor and Hugh Grecian to reference it. Most of us have passed by this site many times in our lives. And when we passed by this site, particularly recently, I think we all had the same thought. How could a building like this be left to deteriorate the way it was deteriorating? I've lived in Westchester almost all my life, but I had 5 years of my corporate career where I lived in other parts of the country. I lived in the beautiful garden spot right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I lived just outside the Beltway in Northern Virginia, outside of D.C., and I lived in the Philadelphia suburbs for 2.5 years, the suburbs adjacent to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And for those of you who know their history, the encampment at Valley Forge was the critical encampment as to whether the Continental Army was going to survive or disperse. And in that encampment, there was no battles at Valley Forge, but the Continental Army was either going to stay together and go on and help us get independence, or was going to disperse, and the world would be a very different place were that to have happened. And I would go to that site. Part of what was my responsibility, it was part of the tourism of that area, and I'd look at the little huts that were built as replicas of what the men of that day stayed in as part of the Continental Army. And I would wonder every single time, and I was in my late 20s at the time, how did they survive? How did that group of men survive to give us a free country? And I wondered about the nature of George Washington, the man. And later, when I lived in the D.C. area, I had a chance to visit the plantation in Mount Vernon. You see the Washington Monument. We talk a lot about greatness, and people proclaim they're great, whatever. But what George Washington accomplished is incalculable. And that the force of his personality was enough to give credence to the government of this nation, and to give, prior to that, credence of the military might of this nation to hold off the world's greatest military power, the British Empire, so that we could have the independence that we've now had in our hands for over 240 years. This building is not just an historic building that we want to honor. This is not just a building that was collapsing and we made a commitment to reestablish it. This tells you something about the man that George Washington was, that he was here, and the Elijah Miller and the Miller family that owned this house in pre-revolution days. But something about the American spirit is what this house is about. Something about our persistence. And not just that we survived the revolution, that we went through the Civil War, and we survived the Depression, and we survived World War II, all things that happened before I ever drew my first breath. But those of us in office now, as forgettable as we will be in 20 and 30 years, sorry guys, we had an obligation to make sure that George Washington's presence was not forgotten. And we had to figure out how to find the money. We had to figure out how to find the will. And if we accomplished anything, all of us together, is that we figured out how to find the will to make sure that this house did not become a pile of rubble that would be swept away, but it would be here long after I'm gone and everybody else is gone, as a statement about what that Battle of White Plains was all those years ago, which we honor today, who Elijah Miller was and his family, and what greatness George Washington gave this nation, and that he touched us here in Westchester County, and we will be forever grateful for that. I now introduce to you the Chairman of the Board of Legislators, the Honorable Ben Boykin.
Thank you, County Executive Latimer. And wow, some things are worth waiting for. This has been a long time coming. On behalf of all 17 members of the County Board of Legislators, and for all the people of Westchester County, this is a great day. You've been introduced to the legislators that are with us today. We've also been joined by our Chief of Staff, Dennis Powers, our Director of Communications, John Travokas, and the Assistant to the Chairman, Lucy Ortiz, who is also a member of the White Plains Historical Society. Just yesterday, we were at the Purdy House. The county executive, Legislator Shimsky, and I, as we were commemorating the Battle of White Plains. But you know, George Washington stayed here as it went down to the Battle of White Plains. Sites like the Miller History House have to live on so that future generations can understand our history. Because you got to understand where we come from to understand where we are and where we're going. So residents, students, and others from around this region and from around this nation can come and visit here. It's a shame that it took so long for this restoration to take place. It really looks good with the tarp removed now. And we're very pleased to be doing this. And we're very pleased that working with the county executive, working with the Board of Legislators, and working with the state, we've got the funding and put the funding together to be here today for this grand reopening. And also, we're in Legislator Kunzio's district, who you'll hear from shortly, who was steadfast working to make sure that this property got reopened. I'd also like to thank Mary Jane Shimsky, who's not only our majority whip, but also head of the Public Works Committee, for always making sure that we get all the T's crossed and I's dotted so that we could make sure that we could move it to the board and get the funding in place. And of course, the county executive and his team for working to make sure that we are here today with this outstanding crowd as we reopen the Miller House. Thank you very much.
Very early in my term of office, we looked at what the financing would need in order for this renovation and this addition to happen. And at the time, I had left the Senate seat that I had represented this area in, and it was before Shelley Mayer was elected to that Senate seat. So this area had one representative in state government for those few months, and that representative is the person we turned to. And we said, can you help us? Can you find a way? We know the budget is just about done. Can you find a way for the state to contribute to the cause that we're trying to deal with? And Assemblyman David Buchwald stepped up to the plate, got to the right people in Albany, and got the right amount of help we needed. Without his help, this wouldn't have happened. And so we thank him for his role, Assemblyman David Buchwald.
Thank you, George, and thank you to all of you for being here. You know, 243 years ago today, the Battle of White Plains was raging on these hills and down towards Battle Hill and White Plains, and history was being made. A whole other history book could be written about what it took to get to today and the renovation that we are celebrating, because many years and many people were involved in this effort. And it is so gratifying to be at a point where we can spread the joy of all of that work having culminated in a great moment of history in its own right. The not-for-profit partners we had in the Friends of the Miller House, Dahl, North Castle Historical Society. I'm proud, like Lucy, to be affiliated with the White Plains Historical Society. I'm a former Board of Trustees member. And the community at large, through their representatives in government, town board here in North Castle, our partners in county government, and my colleagues in the state government, first George Latimer State Senator and then Shelley Mayer State Senator, who thankfully joined me in passing budgets that allow me the opportunity, the great blessing, to be able to support efforts like this, and in particular to support the work that allows there to be a new visitor center here at the Miller House, something that I think the residents of Westchester will be very happy to know that their money was well spent. And this is an effort that could not have been possible without the men and women who took that financing and really made such a wonderful new gem in our county park system. And so I want to thank those who've been a part of that. And for me to be a small portion of today's festivities really means a lot to me. I really believe that local and state history, let alone national history, is something we need to impart to every generation. And as much as we have great schools that can use textbooks to read about our history. There's nothing like experiencing it effectively firsthand by visiting a place like this. The Miller House used to be a place that particularly fourth graders would come and visit and get to learn about our nation's wonderful, unique history. And then for too many years, it was a lesson in what government couldn't do. All that county government was able to do was put a tarp over a leaking roof. That changed, particularly when County Executive George Latimer came into office, and we had a can-do spirit that took all the meetings that I was proud to be a part of, that Margaret Kunzio was a part of, that so many people were willing to put in the time and effort, but it took true leadership. And so to stand here with George Latimer and all these folks, both in front of the cameras and behind, that put their heart and souls into this, I just want to say congratulations.
Thank you again, David. When I first came into office, in fact, in the interim period before I actually took office, I visited with each of the 17 legislators, all of whom I'd known and had worked with in other capacities. It wasn't an introduction for the first time. And I asked them, if there was one thing that I could do that you wanted us to do in your district, what would it be? And each of them had to try to distill down a host of different needs into a single need. And I knew I wasn't just limiting them to one, but I wanted to understand what the priority was. And I knew part of the county very well, but there's parts of the county I didn't know very well. But I also wanted each one of these legislators to know, whether they were Democratic or Republican or conservative, that we were going to govern together to the best of our ability. We would disagree as disagreements naturally arise between people of independent thought. And there's a two-party system so that there is a competition that benefits democracy. I believe in a two-party system. But I also believe when you talk to the legislator who represents a district, that you know that they love that community and they're going to express to you what they really think is necessary. I heard what I'm about to say from Ed Williard. I heard what I'm about to say from John Diaconis, and I heard it from Cynthia and Deb, and I heard it from a host of other people, every member of the town board at one point in time or another. But I asked Margaret Kunzio, what's the one thing that you wanted? And she told me with great depth of feeling how important it was to save this building. So Margaret, your vision has come to pass this day.
It is truly an honor for me to be here. In fact, I'm going to tell you, my husband will be very happy because I spoke about this project so much at home that he fondly teased me and he would call it Margaret's Miller House. So I have a list of thank yous, and if I leave anyone out, please, I apologize. I want to thank George Latimer because he took this project and he got us here to the finish line. New York State Assemblyman David Buchwald, with that extra New York State grant, we have this amazing classroom space that schools and students will utilize. Supervisor Mike Shalero, thank you so much for all the meetings that you came to. There were countless hours spent discussing this project, and I personally want to thank you for the public shout out at the last town board meeting. The North Castle Town Board members, they were all behind, they all were in support of this project. I also would be remiss if I did not thank my colleagues at the Board of Legislature, because they were the ones that approved the additional money, the capital budget amendments, and everything that we needed to get the project to this point. I also want to thank Deb and Cynthia from DAL, Daughters of Liberty's Legacy. We met a number of times, and they actually also videotaped some of the construction here to document it. Also, Friends of the Miller House, North Castle Historical Society. I would also like to thank the Parks Department here, Commissioner Kathy O'Connor, and a special shout out from me personally to Dave DeLucia, who was on call here anytime they needed it during construction. He was a pivotal part of this, not only during the construction, but the planning as well. And ultimately, I have to say a huge thank you to my constituents. Their patience, their support, their voices, that's what helped us get to this point. I want to share with you this right here. This is a pamphlet that I actually found in one of the antique stores up in Cold Spring. I have a thing for history as an educator. Historical sites mean a lot to me. In this pamphlet from 1976, it has a map of all of the historical sites in Westchester and Putnam. Number 9 is George Washington's headquarters. So this here was truly a team effort. This is an example of working together to make government work and preserve history. I am so excited to see future programs here, and I'm very excited that we can put George Washington's headquarters, Elijah Miller House, back on the map and have it as one of the top historical sites in Westchester County. Thank you very much.
The town supervisor of the town of North Castle, Mike Shalera, is a person I've known for a long time. And I admire his leadership in this town, how he has worked across the aisle, Steve, Barbara, Jose, Barry, and getting a group of people to work toward goals in this community. And when Michael, amongst others, highlighted how important this was, I knew that he was speaking on behalf of the town in general. And there was a debate about whether the county should put it onto the town's back because the county didn't want it. And I told him in that first meeting, Michael, what we want is this building to come alive again. You don't have to have it, we don't have to have it, we just have to make sure it comes alive again. Mike Shalera has been a fabulous partner, he and the members of his board and his professional team. Mike Shalera.
Thank you, George. Thanks to the prior speakers, they carried a lot of thank yous for me, so I won't repeat myself. But this project has been a lot of starts and stops for me. I've been serving since '08. John Nona was our county legislator. He got it through the county legislature, money was funded, and then things started to stop again. There were people back then, including, who's not here today, unfortunately, Dory Watson, who was our town historian. She ran the Miller House Committee in town. I make sure I mention her name every other week at our town board meetings. That's how important her legacy is. But throughout, even Mindy Berard, who's currently my assistant, who was John Nona's assistant, who spent so much time on this project all those years ago. And her son, Garrick. But throughout, the starts and stops, when we had some major progress, probably about 7 or 8 years ago with the county, before George was on, Kerry Kasak, John Diaconis, Barry Ryder was at that meeting. That was a pretty good start, and then there was another stop. And then Margaret was elected. That was another start. And then she was able to keep pushing for money. And then George got elected. And as he said, it was very important that we kept this house on these hallowed grounds, right here. And he made sure of that. So, and one of my other predecessors as a supervisor, Bill Weaver, former supervisor, who worked very hard on this, and he passed away this year and was not able to see this, but they're all watching it from upstairs. So thank you to the county, thank you to my colleagues, thank you to the Miller House Committee, Friends of the Miller House, Historical Society. Everybody, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and especially thank you to Margaret for continuing to push from day one when she got elected and getting more money in the budget, and then George making it a reality. Thank you.
We have 2 more speakers, and then after that, we'll take any questions from our friends in the press. And then after that, we'll have a chance to go inside, tour the house. I believe we have some refreshments waiting for you as well. But we want to hear now from some of the people that were actually involved in the nitty-gritty of this. First, Kathy O'Connor, our Commissioner of Parks, Recreation, and Conservation. You've heard the name David DeLucia mentioned. There are others that she needs to highlight as we go from having made the decision to do something and financing it to the actual how are we going to operate it, and then in a second Hugh Grecian and how we're going to actually supervise to make sure that all the people that made this construction happen would actually happen. Commissioner Kathy O'Connor.
Thank you very much, County Executive George Latimer. As the Commissioner of the County Parks Department, I am thrilled that we always say we have 50 facilities. Well, we had 49 for a long time. And the fact that this is now coming to fruition, we're so excited to add it back onto our docket. As everybody has already mentioned, it is a high point in the historical history of Westchester County, and we're just looking so forward to putting together a great program once we get off and running. Early in November, we'll get going with program. We'll be working with Friends of Miller House. We'll be working with the Dolls. We'll be working with a lot of Historical Society people, but we'll also be working with our own Parks Department. Jason Klein is the Director of Conservation. This is under his purview. Unfortunately, he's away right now, but he sends his regards. A shout out to Peter Tartaglia, First Deputy, who oversees conservation. We also, of course, have Dave DeLucia, who I think lived here in the time that Washington was here. You think I'm kidding? Look at him. But again, we have so many people to thank. What a turnout. It's fabulous. Thank God it's not raining. And the fact that we have this visitor center to add on, because we really want to take the opportunity to educate children and other people, but really starting with children, to show them what it's like to have lived in that era as opposed to Game Boy and your cell phone and everything else. So we're really looking forward to it. I want to point out this is the first time you're standing on grass, probably in about 70 years. So I'm very excited that that's here. And I did start off by working here in 1980. My first job with the county, I was giving tours. It's really exciting to see it redone, and it's done beautifully, and I'm so proud to be the commissioner of this, and to really a shout out to George Latimer and the Board of Legislators, because his vision, their work, got this going. And I'd like to just say they gave the job to a woman, Margaret Kunzio. She got the money. Give it to a woman and you're going to get it. Thank you very much. Congratulations to everybody.
I know it's a long program, but it's been a long road to get us here. Hugh Grecian is our Commissioner of the Department of Public Works. When all of the generalities are over, we then have to turn to the hard realities of what does a reconstruction project look like? How will it be supervised? And we passed by here while the construction was going on, hoping that everything was going well, waiting to see the tarp disappear. And only when Hugh Grecian said we were making progress did I really think we were making progress. So Hugh, this day is a victory for you and your team as well.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As County Executive Latimer has said, this house was collapsing. I mean, when we took the tarp off of it in the beginning of this year, basically we didn't know whether the chimney was holding up the house or the house was holding up the chimney. I mean, the tarp that was put on it actually was a detriment. There was mold inside. The first thing we had to do was an environmental cleanup. I had my design team come out here. It was our priority, because the county exec's priority is our priority. We were out here. We came out here with the team after the cleanup, because you couldn't get in the house without doing that. The design professionals could not even go in this house. That's how bad it was. So after that, I brought up my chief architect on this project, John Levy. He has an historic background, because we only replaced in this house what needed to be replaced. It's much more difficult construction than most construction. You take out one, and I said it was basically a house of cards too. If you took out the wrong structure first, the house would have collapsed onto itself. So we did all that, and with the help of who is here today, Vinny Lappin, who is my construction coordinator on this job. It's been a great job. He was out here throughout. It's on time. It's on budget. And like I said, it was a great day for the Westchester County, and especially my department. I appreciate it. Take care.
A little change in plans. We're going to do the ceremonial cutting of the ribbon, and then we'll do Q&A with the press. Just some general closeout remarks. I said in my most recent State of the County message, at one point when I was talking about the different initiatives, I said, we are not yet satisfied and we are not tired, meaning that we have so many more things to do that are essential things to do. We're not yet satisfied. A day like today is a marvelous day, but it isn't the end of what we're required to do if we want to do our job properly. And we are not tired. We know that it's going to take equivalent effort to do the things that lay before us. And we know that there'll be legitimate debate about what happens and what doesn't happen before us. But when we stood before the Sprain Ridge pools in Yonkers a few months ago, and they had lay fallow, one of them for 10 years and one of them for the most of those 10 years, and we cut that ribbon, and we saw kids jumping into that pool, we knew that we were doing the right thing. When we stood at DeLuca Park in Elmsford, And Bobby Williams and his team got an infusion of money through the CDBG program that allowed them to fix that park and that section of Elmsford, a program that had been we've been out of business for 5 years. We knew that we were doing the right thing. And as sure as I can say those things today, when we put solar panels on our garage roofs in Valhalla and Yonkers, when we go forward to do a host of things, when we stand as we are today on Memorial Field in Mount Vernon to dedicate a brand new field in that city, we will know that we're doing what voters sent us here to do. And we did it together, not the county versus the town, not the Republicans and the Democrats at each other's throats, not the legislator against the executive, but that we all understood that we had to work together, and that working together required us to compromise and to come to some closure so that this day could happen. I close with some very historic words that I believe are attributed to John Pershing, but there's so many historians in the audience. If I'm wrong, you'll correct me and I'll apologize. As World War I went on for a long swath of time, and France and England and Germany were all being ground down, the Americans got into the war. And when the doughboys came over, Irving Berlin over there, when they came over to France, they went to the burial site of the Marquis de Lafayette, who came to America to help us win independence. And he said that day, Lafayette, we are here. We have come to the old country because you saved us in the new country. General Washington, you saved us. We're here. This generation of Americans are here to remember you and your great sacrifice. And this building will live longer because all of us, we Americans of today, we remember what he did, what the Miller family did, and we have pride in that. So let's go cut a ribbon.